What up, y'all? What up, y'all? Today's message is brought to you by Clean on Purpose. If you like this sweater, follow Sandpaper on Instagram, and I will put his @ right here. Sandpaper, brought to you by Sandpaper. He is an inspiration of mine, and he is also an advisor to the Sober Gang. So he is very much a part of what it is that I'm doing today. Also, we have a video that I directed of his out right now. One titled Serenity, the other titled Journey. I will continue to do videography for the artist Sandpaper from Fillmore, California. San Francisco, California, the Fillmore district. Okay, San Francisco, stand up. Now, let's jump into step 3, y'all. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Let me say it again so we really understand what step we're on. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him last time. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in, man. This is the real book. This is the real. I ain't making nothing up. Practicing step 3 is like the opening of a door, which to all appearances is still closed and locked. All we need is a key and the decision to swing the door open. There is only one key, and that key is called willingness. Once unlocked by willingness, the door opens almost of itself, and looking through it, we shall see a pathway beside which is an inscription. It reads, "This is the way to a faith that works." In the first 2 steps, we were engaged in reflection. We saw that we were powerless over alcohol, but we also perceived that faith of some kind, if only in AA itself, is possible to anyone. These conclusions did not require action. They required only acceptance. Like all the remaining steps, step 3 calls for affirmative action. For it is only by action that we can cut away the self-will, which has always blocked the entry of God, or, if you like, a higher power, into our lives. Faith, to be sure, is necessary, but faith alone can avail nothing. We can have faith, yet keep God out of our lives. Therefore, our problems now become just how and by what specific means shall we be able to let Him in. Step 3 represents our first attempt to do this. In fact, the effectiveness of the whole AA program will rest upon how well and earnestly we have tried to come to a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. To every worldly and practical-minded beginner, this step looks hard, even impossible. No matter how much one wishes to try, exactly how can he turn his own will and his own life over to the care of whatever God he thinks there is? Fortunately, we who have tried it, and with equal misgivings, can testify that anyone at all, can begin to do it. We can further add that a beginning, even the smallest, is all that we need. Once we have placed the key of willingness in the lock and have opened the door ever so slightly open, we find that we can always open it some more. Though self-will may slam it shut again, as it frequently does, it will always respond the moment we pick it up again. The key of willingness. Maybe this all sounds mysterious and remote. Something like Einstein's theory of relativity or a proposition in nuclear physics. It isn't at all. Let's look at how practical it actually is. Every man and woman who has joined AA and intends to stick has, without realizing, made a beginning on step 3. Isn't it true that in all matters touching upon alcohol, each of them has decided to turn his or her life over to the care, protection, and guidance of Alcoholics Anonymous? Already, a willingness has been achieved to cast out one's own will and one's own ideas about the alcohol problem in favor of those suggested by AA. Any willing newcomer feels sure AA is the only safe harbor for the foundering vessel he has become. Now, if this is not turning one's will and life over to a new-found providence, then what is it? But suppose that instinct still cries out, as it certainly will, yes, respecting alcohol, I guess I have to be dependent upon AA. But in all other matters, I must still maintain my independence. Nothing is going to turn me into a non-entity. If I keep on turning my life and my will over to the care of something or somebody else, what will become of me? I'll look like a hole in the donut. This, of course, is the process by which instinct and logic always seem to bolster egotism and to frustrate spiritual development. The trouble is that this kind of thinking takes no real account of the facts, and the facts seem to be these. The more we become willing to depend upon a higher power, the more independent we actually are. Therefore, dependence, as AA practices it, is really a means of gaining true independence of the spirit. Let's examine for a moment this idea of dependence at all level of everyday living. In this area, it is startling to discover how dependent we actually are, and how unconscious of that dependence. Every modern house has electric wiring carrying power and light to its interior. We are delighted with this dependence. Our main hope is that nothing will ever cut off the supply of the current. By so accepting our dependence upon this marvel of science, we find ourselves more independent personally. Not only are we more independent, we are even more comfortable and secure. Power flows just where it is needed. Silently and surely, electricity, that strange energy so few people understand, meets our simplest daily needs, and our most desperate ones too. Ask the polio sufferer confined to an iron lung, who depends with complete trust upon a motor to keep the breath of life in him. But the moment our mental or emotional independence is in question, how differently we behave. How persistently we claim the right to decide all by ourselves just what we shall think and just how we shall act. Oh yes, we'll weigh the pros and cons of every problem. We'll listen politely to those who would advise us. But all the decisions are to be ours alone. Nobody is going to meddle with our personal independence in such matters. Besides, we think there is no one we can surely trust. We are certain that our intelligence, backed by willpower, can rightly control our inner lives and guarantee us success in the world we live in. This brave philosophy, wherein each man plays God, sounds good in the speaking, but it still has to meet the acid test. How well does it actually work? One good look in the mirror ought to be answer enough for any alcoholic. Should his own image in the mirror be too awful to contemplate, and it usually is, he might first take a look at the results normal people are getting from self-sufficiency. Everywhere he sees people filled with anger and fear. Society breaking up into warring fragments. Each fragment says to the others, "We are right and you are wrong." Every such pressure group, if it is strong enough, self-righteously imposes its will upon the rest. And everywhere the same thing is being done on an individual basis. The sum of all this mighty effort is less peace and less brotherhood than before. The philosophy of self-sufficiency is not paying off. Plainly enough, it is a bone-crushing juggernaut to those who It is a bone-crushing juggernaut whose final achievement is ruin. Therefore, we who are alcoholics can consider ourselves fortunate indeed. Each of us has had his own near-fatal encounter with the juggernaut of self-will, and has suffered enough under its weight to be willing to look for something better. So, it is by circumstance rather than by any virtue that we have been driven to AA, have admitted defeat, have acquired the rudiments of faith, and now want to make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to a higher power. We realize that the word dependence is as distasteful to many psychiatrists and psychologists as it is to alcoholics. Like our professional friends, we too are aware that there are wrong forms of dependence. We have experienced many of them. No adult man or woman, for example, should be in too much emotional dependence upon a parent. They should have been weaned long before. And if they have not been, they should wake up to the fact. This very form of faulty dependence has caused many a rebellious alcoholic to conclude that dependence of any sort must be intolerably damaging. But dependence upon AA group or upon a higher power hasn't produced any baleful results. When World War II broke out, this spiritual principle had its first major test. AAs entered the services and were scattered all over the world. Would they be able to take discipline, stand up under fire, and endure the monotony and misery of war? Would the kind of dependence they had learned in AA carry them through? Well, it did. They had even fewer alcoholic lapses or emotional binges than AA's Safe at Home did. They were just as capable of endurance and valor as any other soldier. Whether in Alaska or on the Salerno beachhead, their dependence upon a higher power worked. And far from being a weakness, this dependence was their chief source of strength. So how exactly can the willing person continue to turn his will and his life over to the higher power? He made a beginning we have seen. When we commence to rely upon AA for the solution of his alcohol problem. I'm going to say it again. He made a beginning we have seen when he commenced to rely upon AA for the solution of his alcohol problem. By now, though, the chances are that he has become convinced that he has more problems than alcohol, and that some of these refuse to be solved by all the sheer personal determination and courage he can muster. They simply will not budge. They make him desperately unhappy and threaten his newfound sobriety. Our friend is still victimized by remorse and guilt. When he thinks of yesterday, bitterness still overpowers him. When he broods upon those he still envies or hates, his financial insecurities worry him sick, and panic takes over when he thinks of all the bridges to safety that alcohol burned behind him. And how shall he ever straighten out that awful jam that cost him the affection of his family and separated him from them? His lone courage and unaided will cannot do it. Surely he must now depend upon somebody or something else. At first, that somebody is likely to be his closest AA friend. He relies upon the assurance that his many troubles, now made more accurate because he cannot use alcohol to kill the pain, can be solved too. Of course, the sponsor points out that our friend's life is still unmanageable, even though he is sober. That after all, only a bare start on AA's program has been made. More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism and by attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed. But it is bound to be a far cry from the permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. That is just where the remaining steps of the AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring the much desired result. Then it is explained that other steps of AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. This statement may surprise newcomers who have experienced nothing but constant deflation and a growing conviction that human will is of no value whatever. They have become persuaded, and rightly so, that many problems beside alcohol will not yield to a headlong assault powered by the individual alone. But now it appears that there are certain things which only the individual can do, all by himself and in the light of his own circumstances. He needs to develop the quality of willingness. He needs to develop the quality of willingness. When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make the decision to exert himself. Trying to do this is an act of his own will. All of the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles, and so we trust to God's will. It is when we try to make our own will conform with God's that we begin to use it rightly. To all of us, this was a most wonderful revelation. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps. And step 3 opens the door. Once we have come into agreement with these ideas, it is really easy to begin the practice of step 3. In all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, we can pause, ask for quiet, and in the stillness simply say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will be done, not mine. Step 3. One last time, in case someone's late. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, y'all. Step 3. Clean on purpose. See, Sober Gang got a quick message. We not just sober. We clean on purpose. You feel me? You can go to jail and sober up, but you can't get clean without getting clean on purpose, man. Work the steps. This was step 3. Go ahead and get you a 12 and 12 and read this book for yourself. What's up, y'all? We're going to jump right into Tradition 3. Alright, once again, today's reading is brought to you by Clean on Purpose. Alright, the founder of Clean on Purpose is the rapper named Sam Paper. Alright, he has a bunch of merch that you can purchase that is it's very beautiful to wear. It's black owned, it's artistic, and it's inspiring. So this is one of much of what he has. Clean on Purpose. He got that cleaned in the MF. He got all type of stuff going on. So Sam Paper, the rapper from San Francisco Fillmore District. Alright. Sober Gang reading Tradition 3. Alright, let's run it. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. This tradition is packed with meaning. For AA is really saying to every serious drinker, you are an AA member if you say so. You can declare yourself in. Nobody can keep you out, no matter who you are, no matter how long you've gone, no matter how grave your emotional complications, even your crimes. We still can't deny you. AA, we don't want to keep you out. We aren't a bit afraid you'll harm us. Never mind how twisted or violent you may be. We just want to be sure that you get the same great chance for sobriety that we've had. So, you're an AA member the minute you declare yourself. To establish this principle of membership took years of harrowing experience. In our early time, nothing seemed so fragile, so easily breakable as an AA group. Hardly an alcoholic we approached paid any attention. Hardly an alcoholic we approached paid any attention. Most of those who did join us were like flickering candles in a windstorm. Time after time, their uncertain flames blew out and couldn't be relighted. Our unspoken constant thought was, which of us may be next? A member gives us a vivid glimpse of those days. At one time, he said, every AA group had many membership rules. Everyone was scared witless that something or somebody would capsize the boat and dump us all back into the drink. Our foundation office asked each group to send in its list of protective regulations. The total list was a mile long. If all of those rules had been in effect everywhere, nobody could have possibly joined AA at all. So great was the sum of our anxiety and fear. We were resolved to admit nobody to AA, but that hypothetical class of people we termed pure alcoholics. Except for their guzzling and the unfortunate results thereof, they could have no other complications. So beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. Yes, sir. We'd cater only to pure and respectable alcoholics. Any others would surely destroy us. Besides, if we took in those odd ones, what would decent people say about us? We built a fine mesh fence right around AA. Maybe this sounds comical now. Maybe you think we old-timers were pretty intolerant. But I can tell you, there was nothing funny about this situation then. We were grim because we felt our lives and homes were threatened. And there was no laughing matter. Intolerant, you say? Well, we were frightened. Naturally, we began to act like most everybody does when afraid. After all, isn't fear the true basis of intolerance? Yes, we were intolerant. How could we then guess that all of those fears were to prove groundless? How could we know that thousands of these sometimes frightening people were to make astonishing recoveries and become our greatest workers and intimate friends? Was it credible that AA was to have a divorce rate far lower than average? Could we then foresee that troublesome people were to become our principal teachers of patience and tolerance? Could any then imagine a society which would include every conceivable kind of character and cut across every barrier of race, creed, politics, and language with ease? Why did AA finally drop all its membership regulations? Why did we leave it to each newcomer to decide himself whether he was an alcoholic and whether he should join us? Why did we dare to say, contrary to the experience of society and government everywhere, that we would neither punish nor deprive any AA of membership. That we must never compel anyone to pay anything, believe anything, or conform to anything. The answer, now seen in Tradition 3, was simplicity itself. At last, experience taught us that to take away any alcoholic's full chance was sometimes to pronounce his death sentence. Let's read that again. At last, experience taught us that to take away any alcoholic's full chance was to sometimes pronounce his death sentence, and often condemn him to endless misery. Who dared to be the judge, jury, and executioner of his own sick brother? As group after group saw these possibilities, they finally abandoned all membership regulations. One dramatic experience after another clinched this determination until it became our universal tradition. Here are two examples. On the AA calendar, it was year 2. In that time, nothing could be seen but two struggling, nameless groups of alcoholics trying to hold their faces up into the light. A newcomer appeared at one of these groups, knocked on the door, and asked to be let in. He talked frankly with that group's oldest member. He soon proved that his was a desperate case, and that, above all, he wanted to get well. But, he asked, "Will you let me join your group? Since I am the victim of another addiction, even worse stigmatized than alcohol, you may not want me among you, or will you?" There was the dilemma. What should groups do? The oldest member summoned 2 others, and in confidence laid out the explosive facts in their laps. He said, "Well, what about it? If we turn this man away, he'll soon die. If we allow him in, only God knows what trouble he'll brew. What shall the answer be? Yes or no?" At first, the elders could only look at the objections. "We deal," they said, "with alcoholics only. Shouldn't we sacrifice this one for the sake of the many?" So went the discussion, while the newcomer's fate hung in the balance. Then, one of the 3 spoke in a very different voice. "What are we really afraid of?" he said. "Is our reputation? We are much more afraid of what people might say than the trouble this strange alcoholic might bring. As we've been talking, 5 words short have been running through my mind." I'll say that again. As we've been talking, 5 short words have been running through my mind. Something keeps repeating to me. What would the Master do? What would the Master do? What would the Master do? Not another word was said. What more indeed could be said? Overjoyed, the newcomer plunged into 12-step work. Tirelessly, he laid AA's message before scores of people. Since this was a very early group, those scores have since multiplied themselves into thousands. Never did he trouble anyone with his other difficulty. AA had taken its first step in the formation of Tradition 3. Not long after the man's double stigma knocked for admission. Say it again. Not long after, the man with the double stigma knocked for admission. AA's other group received into its membership a salesman, which we shall call Ed, a power driver. This one, and brash as any salesman could possibly be, he had at least an idea, a minute on how to improve AA. He had at least an idea, a minute on how to improve AA. These ideas he sold to fellow members with the same burning enthusiasm with which he distributed automobile polish. But he had one idea that wasn't so saleable. Ed was an atheist. His pet obsession was that AA could get along better without its God nonsense. He browbeat everyone and everybody expected that he'd soon get drunk. For at the time, you see, AA was on the pious side. There must be a heavy penalty, it was thought, for blasphemy. Distressingly enough, Ed proceeded to stay sober. At length, the time came for him to speak in a meeting. We shivered, for we knew what was coming. He paid a fine tribute to the fellowship. He told how his family had been reunited. He extolled the virtue of honesty. He recalled the joys of 12th step work, and then he lowered the boom. Ed cried, "I can't stand this God stuff. It's a lot of malarkey for weak folks. This group doesn't need it, and I won't have it. To hell with it." A great wave of outrage, resentment engulfed the meeting, sweeping every member to a single resolve. Out he goes. The elders led Ed aside. They said firmly, "You can't talk like this around here. You'll have to quit it or get out." With great sarcasm, Ed came back at them. "Now do tell, is that so?" He reached over to a bookshelf and took up a sheaf of papers. On top of them lay the foreword to the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Then, under preparation, he read aloud, "The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking." Relentlessly, Ed went on, "When you guys wrote that sentence, did you mean it or didn't you?" Dismayed, the elders looked at one another, for they knew he had them cold. He had them cold. So Ed stayed. Ed not only stayed, he stayed sober month after month. The longer he kept dry, the louder he talked against God. The group was in anguish so deep that all fraternal charity had vanished. "When, oh when," groaned members to one another, "will that guy get drunk?" Quite a while later, Ed got a sales job which took him out of town. At the end of a few days, the news came in. He'd sent a telegram for money, and everybody knew what that meant. Then he got on the phone. In those days, we'd go anywhere on a 12th step job, no matter how unpromising. But this time, nobody stirred. Leave him alone. Let him try it by himself for once. Maybe he'll learn a lesson. About 2 weeks later, Ed stole by night into an AA member's house and, unknown to the family, went to bed. Daylight found the master of the house and another friend drinking their morning coffee. A noise was heard on the stairs. To their consternation, Ed appeared, a quizzical smile on his lips. Have you fellows had your morning meditation? They quickly sensed that he was quite in earnest. In fragments, his story came out. In a neighboring state, Ed had holed up in a cheap hotel. After all his pleas for help had been rebuffed, these words rang in his fevered mind. They have deserted me. I have been deserted by my own kind. This is the end. Nothing is left. And he tossed onto his bed. His hand brushed the bureau nearby, touching a book. Opening the book, he read. It was a Gideon Bible. Ed never confided any more of what he saw and felt in that hotel room. It was the year 1938. He hasn't had a drink since. Nowadays, when old-timers who knew Ed foregather, they exclaim, what if he had actually succeeded? What if we had actually succeeded in throwing Ed out for blasphemy? What would have happened to him and all those others he later helped? So the hand of providence early gave us a sign that any alcoholic is a member of our society when he says so. I'm going to read that last part one last time before we end. In a neighboring state, Ed had holed up in a cheap hotel after all his pleas for help had been rebuffed. These words rang in his fevered mind. They have deserted me. I have been deserted by my own kind. This is the end. Nothing is left. As he tossed on his bed, his hand brushed the bureau nearby, touching a book. Opening the book, he read. It was a Gideon Bible. Ed never confided any more of what he saw and felt in the hotel room. It was year 1938. He hasn't had a drink since. Nowadays, when old-timers know Ed foregather, they exclaim, what if we had actually succeeded in throwing Ed out for blasphemy? What would have happened to him and all the others he later helped? So the hand of providence early gave us a sign that any alcoholic is a member of our society when he says so. This is the long form of Tradition 3. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that As a group, they have no other affiliation. Wow. Well, one thing that's not confirmed is if before Ed found that Bible, did he definitely relapse or not. But after he read that Bible in 1938, he hadn't had a drink since. So I think it relates to step 3. And I'm not trying to scare off the atheists from working the steps, but they seem to be telling a fragmented story about how he turned his will and care over to God as he understood him, and he began, sound like the Gideon Bible saved his life. You know them little Bibles that you be seeing like everywhere and in jail and the juvenile halls and stuff? There's a bunch of little Bibles with Psalms and Proverbs in it. That's a Gideon Bible. Anyway, this was Tradition 3, brought to you by Clean on Purpose, read by Sober Gang. Subscribe to Sober Gang TV. Look up the rapper Sandpaper. We out.